Hi everybody, my name is Chelsea, aka Sunspren. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about Rings of Power, and this time I've seen episodes 1 and 2. Well, we were right. First of all, there is a little bit of satisfaction in knowing now that at least the beginning is about what we figured it would be. I'm far from alone. We can tell for a fact now which writers were paid for their reviews. Or at least we can tell who definitely was not paid for their review, right? Over at Daily Mail UK, there's a fantastically scathing indictment of The Lord of the Rings, Rings of Power, which is worth a read. But I'm not going to be scathing. I mean, what's the point of that? It's a disappointment, and we all know that this could have been made differently, but it wasn't. They decided they wanted to go with this, and that's fine, right? Well, it's not fine, but it'll have to be because we don't have a choice, right? There's so many things wrong with it. Other reactors that are much more savvy than I have already spoken about how bad the dialogue is. It's pretty cringy. Somebody clearly tried to emulate what Fran Walsh and Philippa Boyens did for Lord of the Rings, the movies, but they couldn't. They didn't arrive at anything close, particularly for the elves. Sometimes the elves speak in a lofty way and it works, but a lot of the time they speak in a lofty way and it falls flat, or it directly contradicts what they do. What they say and what they do are two different things, or just basic writing. Like, characters talk past one another a lot, which bothers me. I really hated Galadriel and Halbrand's discussion after he saved her from the depths in episode 2. Goes without saying, I'm sorry if I spoiled that. Spoiler alert for episodes 1 and 2 of The Rings of Power. But they talk past one another. They don't talk like people who just met, or just had this terrible, horrifying experience together. Not at all. It's so bizarre. They talk past one another about where the orcs are from his homeland, and all this, where his homeland is and stuff. It's confrontational, and yet they're still talking past one another. It's not very good, in my opinion. It's weak in that regard. And it happens with even with characters who've known each other a long time, like Elrond and Galadriel. Nobody trusts anybody in this story, and it baffles me. Like, I can understand some intrigue and that they want to draw you in with that, but the fact that no one trusts each other is just bizarre to me. Like, even the elves don't trust one another. Like, Galadriel's little force that goes to Foredwife to hunt Sauron, which is entirely stupid, but whatever. They just ditch her. They just throw down their swords and they're like, we're not following you anymore. We're going home. I never knew elves to be so disloyal. Presumably these people have been together as a band with Galadriel for some time. They've traveled with her. They've been on these quests. You'd think they would have some bond with one another, which is not shown at all in any capacity whatsoever. They just straight up ditch her. And that one elf that they focus on as like her main betrayer or whatever, it just has the worst face of like that I've ever seen. I don't know. I didn't know elves commonly acted like that, but okay. So many instances where you get the feeling there should be a history here. There should be like more going on than there really is because it's big and beautiful, but it's hollow and unsurprisingly so. That's what happens when you try to cram all of that second age into a single period of time. It loses the sense that these events are connected across time to other events that preceded them. For a show with 6 minutes of prologue, you'd think that would come across pretty well, but it doesn't. They show us, like a flash of Valinor and the two trees dying and all that stuff. They show us a Morgoth. But if you don't understand, if you haven't already read all that, you're not going to understand any of it. It's just going to be like blah, 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 excuse to hunt Sauron. Got it. Elves are from the big, pretty place where I guess nobody dies. Awesome. It's not going to connect real well. Showing the elves as children struck me as a strange choice because they are, for immortal beings, we don't often think of immortal beings as children. Not to say they were never children. I'm just saying it like conceptually, like when you're just looking at them, they don't look any different than humans, except for their ears, and they're pretty. And they're wearing like headdresses sometimes and pretty costumes, but they don't exude light, they don't move differently, they don't particularly look any different than humans. Their speech is a little loftier. But they don't manage to convey that sense of how old the elves really are, how old Galadriel really is. They just don't. And that's funny because the showing them as children doesn't help. It makes them seem more human. And there's no indication of how many years have passed between that moment and this moment. Like, really. They may have flashed it up on the screen or something, but that it doesn't come across as a great amount of time. Anyway, that's some general pet peeves. To get much more specific, we could go character by character, right? Galadriel is the worst possible main character they could have chosen. People have already pointed out she's practically a Mary Sue. They've given her a vengeance arc that's standard, pretty lame. I mean, what was she gonna do if she found Sauron? That's my question. Like, you're hunting the enemy. Okay, what if you found the enemy? Are you gonna go toe to toe with Sauron by yourself? Because you're gonna die, right? Hell, her little band of elves couldn't even handle a snow troll. She had to dispatch the snow troll because apparently, she's the badass, of course. She's the only one who believes evil's back. She's the only one who can handle the troll. She's the only one who can talk, who's strong enough in her beliefs to continue hunting evil. She's the only one who turns back from Valinor and all of that. And you want to talk ridiculous? Even if I bought everything that they were saying about this character, about this Galadriel, there's no way she gets on that boat and gets all the way to the Vale, right? With the opening and Valinor beyond and the golden light in her face, and then goes, I think I'll grab that dagger and jump back in and swim. Swim across the ocean. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. Oh, it's ridiculous. Galadriel would have never gotten on that boat. If that was her decision, she would have said, no, I can't. And she would have made that decision stepping onto the boat, not at the literal gate of Valinor. I don't believe that at all. Even for this made-up character who is not really Galadriel, I still don't find it believable. She seemed like she was strong enough in her conviction that she might have been turned away temporarily, but she wouldn't have just bought it, right? Bought the ticket back to Valinor thing that Elrond was talking about. Elrond, passable? I don't know. He's not the Elrond that I picture. However, he's doing a good job as an elf, given that he doesn't have the long hair or the appearance, but I still feel like he's genuine in some way. I mean, not Elrond that I know and love, but okay, he's all right, I guess. But the fact that, okay, he reveres Celebrimbor, apparently. Celebrimbor wants to make this tower so he can make a forge, so he can make stuff of power. And I'm like, to what end? Surely they're going to tell us to what end, right? And I'm like, Elrond, surely you're going to ask, hey, things of power to do what? Like, you don't just make, oh, we're going to make objects of great power. What do you want to do with them? Would be the logical follow-up question. Apparently we don't have logical follow-up questions in this show. We just roll with it. Meanwhile, Elrond and Durin are in a spat because Durin's mad he hasn't shown up in 20 years. Well, how come you guys didn't write letters? And how come Elrond didn't send ahead and say, hey, I'm going to meet you. We're coming. I'm coming with a retinue to Khazad-dûm. It seems like it would be pretty simple and straightforward, but they're making things convoluted for the sake of illustrating this friendship that's on the rocks so that we can have Disa be a nice person. And again, another female who, the only one who could have made Durin, relent and allow Elrond to be friends with Elrond again. Silly. There's a lot of that in this show. Bronwyn in episode 2, she comes back from having watched an entire village that was burned to the ground, right? She tells everyone in her village about it, and they just ignore her. Because reasons, even though that's ridiculous. Like, if you're in the country and your neighboring village has been burned, pillaged, and a giant tunnel bored through it, you're going to want to know that. And people are going to want to start going, oh my God, are you serious? What happened to them? Now, they might not leave their town and all their belongings right away, but they're definitely going to be concerned. And none of them were concerned. They're just like, oh, whatever. Because they need Bronwyn to seem cool and awesome when she comes in there with the orc head and plops it down and goes, we leave at first light. Well, it just goes to show that all the secondary characters, they're just there to serve the plot. They're there for a contrast for the main characters. They don't make sense. Their decisions don't make sense. Even Gil-galad at this point isn't making a whole lot of sense. He said something to Elrond like, I saw in my vision or something that we need to send Galadriel away because if she stays here, she might bring the thing that she's working against or something. And I'm sure they'll make that make sense. But at the time being, you're like, okay, what did you see? In what way? And no one's ever specific. It's so cliche. Again, people just talk past one another and everyone just accepts it. It's not very well done, in my opinion. I'll give you an example of like a place where it's really well done. This might be a little bit of an odd comparison, but I'll do it anyway. In Game of Thrones, when Arya and Hot Pie and Gendry are walking around, when they are at Harrenhal, when they've just left Harrenhal and they're traveling on their own, right? Hot Pie is a total non-entity. He's a total secondary character to the story, but he always feels like his own person. He makes his own decisions. He's a scaredy cat, but he doesn't just go along with everything that, like, he does go along with a lot of the things that Arya says, but he doesn't, he has his own character. There's a difference, right? He's very clearly got his own opinions. He's his own character, totally independent of them. And so is Gendry. He's not just there to serve Arya, to make Arya look good or make Arya look better and right. They have their own story and their own reasons for doing things. Even the lords of Westeros, in various scenarios, they have their own reason for doing things. Hell, even the tree people, the children of the forest, had their own reasons for doing things. It was just appreciated, I guess. I appreciated that. And it's totally missing. Totally missing here. The Harfoots are more charming than I thought they would be, even though hobbits have no place in this part of Middle-earth. Nori is very cute. And I'm pretty sure Meteor Man's going to turn out to be Gandalf, who's somehow forgotten who he is and lost control of his powers. Like, he means well, but bad things are happening because he doesn't have control of his powers fully yet, which is also baloney, you know. I'll never understand why they didn't just hold out for the rights to the Silmarillion. Just wait, Amazon, just wait. Because this is just gonna fall flat. It's very beautiful. The soundtrack is very beautiful, and the sets are by and large quite nice. There's some stuff in Lindon that I found just beautiful, breathtaking. The fireworks and the trees and the carvings of the elves, the heroes of the elves who had passed. I found that very lovely. It's just lovely. And imaginative. I don't remember that being part of Tolkien, but it was really cool to look at and believable that they might memorialize their dead in that way. However, you know, despite little things here and there, I'm like, oh, that was cute. Oh, that was pretty. Oh, that was grand. It doesn't feel at all like a myth, like a legend. It's as I said in previous video, it's more common. They've brought it to a personal level with these characters, but they're not that interesting because there's not that much there, especially with Galadriel. Let's see, where was I? Nori's that's what I already said, that Nori's cute. I like the moment when she says that she feels responsible for the Meteor Man. I was meant to find him and I feel responsible for him. I thought that's an interesting take. I would very much like to see a story that has nothing to do with the Lord of the Rings, that is about a sprite who finds a Meteor Man and he turns out to be a wizard. I'd watch that show. As long as it had nothing to do with Lord of the Rings. Because she's cute. But anyway, cute only takes you so far. Let's see what else we got here. I'm looking at my notes real quick. Yeah, this is a really good point. Oh yeah, Elrond is like a speechwriter for Gil-galad. I didn't know Gil-galad needed a speechwriter, but all right, I guess he does. Silly. I guess Bronwyn's like the only person who's female in her whole town. Or at least in that tavern she was in. I'm like, where are all the broads? Sorry. Had to ask. Oh, weird. This is weird. Her kid, right? Bronwyn's a single mother. She has a child. We have no idea who the father was. No mention of him whatsoever. No idea what this kid is even like. He barely has 3 lines in the whole show. And he finds the blade that apparently belonged to Sauron. It's amazing that they had that much exposition, like 2 entire episodes, and didn't even get to this kid and what he's even basically like. Weird. Oh, might as well hit Arendir and Bronwyn. An elf-human romance that starts in the middle. They're already in love when we start the show. How boring. Like, the best part of every romance is how they meet, how they interact, what they find fascinating about one another, how they fall in love. None of that. We're just already in the middle. They love each other for reasons unknown. We don't even know who they are. We barely know what they're like. We don't even have a reason to give a crap. Terrible storytelling. But okay, whatever. They're very one-dimensional, maybe 2-dimensional. There's a lot of that going around with the original characters that they are focusing on. Of course, there's only 2 episodes so far, so maybe that will improve. Let's see. It's beautiful, but it's hollow, right? I guess we knew that was going to happen. No surprise there. It's just a shame that it's so obvious. Like, you don't even need to hear from the secondary characters. You know what they're going to say already before it even comes out of their mouth. And you kind of know what Galadriel's going to say. She's very one note, very Mary Sue. There doesn't seem to be any development of any kind. You know, Nori is part of the female Frodo. She's the female Frodo, and there's a Sam counterpart. You know, we have to have that. Next episode, apparently, we're going to get Tarmiriel, Queen Regent. Women did not rule Numenor, FYI, but whatever. And it's just so obvious. Like, if it comes from a natural place, okay, fine. I could even forgive like the whole Disa thing. I felt like out of all the examples I've listed of women are the only ones who could have done this, the Disa thing was at least believable, that she'd be like, hey, I'm interested in this elf friend you talked about. Don't run him off just yet. I like that about her, and I could believe that of a female dwarf, that they'd be like, no, shut up, husband. I love you, but you're getting on my nerves. I want to know more about him because you were talking about him for like an eon, and then all of a sudden you're mad at him. No, I want to know who he is and what he's about. I like that. I get the feeling the dwarves are about to discover Mithril, which is just terrible for the timeline. I mean, how do you have... Somebody explain to me how you have Celeborn planning to build this giant forge thing by spring for no reason. We're not, it's not explained why it needs to be done by spring, but it needs to be done by the spring, apparently. To make things of power, of unknown provenance and of unknown intent, with materials, like when Mithril has just barely been discovered. That's why you don't compress an entire like 2,000 years into the beginning of one show. Things just don't make logical sense. Yeah, I think that's just about all I wanted to say. It's kind of silly, to be honest. I guess I'm less hurt by it now because I've seen it, and it's not going to sail with the fans from the books. Pieces of it will. I mean, I'll even admit I think pieces of it were pretty unique, I guess I'll say. Certainly not Tolkien. I mean, it's just a pure fan fiction. You know, hobbits, proto-hobbits, Harfoots, whatever, gathering berries and eating them. It's cute. It's they're hiding, right? They're hiding from the big people, and that's out of the books. That's out of the story. They hid. Okay. That's an interpretation of them hiding. All right. I can kind of see it. It's just the you know, it's not, they shouldn't be there. They don't have anything to do with anything. They only serve to highlight. I think the only reason the Harfoots exist is so that Nori can help that guy who's probably going to turn out to be Gandalf. If he turns out to be Sauron, I'm going to be really pissed, because that would mean that Sauron should remember the hobbits pretty well. If they're the first people he met when he returned to Middle Earth, he would remember them extremely well. So I'm really hoping that's Gandalf. Even though Gandalf doesn't really belong, sailing by comet, travel by comet, not being able to talk, not in command of his magic. Weird. I love how, this is a random aside, but I gotta say it, right? I love how Gil-galad's just like, Galadriel's kind of a problem. Let's send her away. And then as soon as she's gone, picks up that leaf and it starts turning black, and he's like, oh shit. That's what I mean by the elves being brought sort of low. Like, we're manipulating people to get them to leave and then regretting it immediately. Oh, they just don't strike me as terribly elven sometimes. Okay, and one last thing before I stop, right? There's this tension that exists in this show between all of the peoples all of the time, and it makes no sense. There's no precedent for it. It just comes out of nowhere. Like, okay, I can kind of understand the tension between the elves and men in that area where the men served Morgoth, or their ancestors had served Morgoth, and the elves are keeping an eye on them. That's fair game, I think, from the stories. They were definitely suspicious of those people. Elves were definitely keeping an eye on men. They were definitely, some of them were totally jaded and were like, no, we don't trust men at all because of that, because some of them turned on us and they didn't forget, and they're resentful about it. Okay, I can understand how men and elves in that regard would not look favorably on one another all the time. However, there's plenty of men and elves that get along just fine in Middle Earth. There's plenty. I mean, Galadriel's brother, after all, was like the first elf to come upon the humans, the very first humans, and they were as enamored of him as he was of them. And the legacy of that is that, yes, there were men who turned, their backs on elves and joined Morgoth, but some fought very bravely and valiantly with the elves, and that legacy should endure too. There should be plenty of elf-human friendships that are, or if not friendships, then respect, mutual respect, and understanding that they share a world. They've shared a world for eons at this point. If they're not new, like when they rescue, or Galadriel's in the water and she gets up on that raft with those people, and they look at her ear and say, oh, she's an elf, throw her back in. That's Witcher territory. That's like racism, Witcher racism stuff that's creeping in. That's like, no, it wouldn't have been quite like that, right? Not with most people. They're making it out like that's mostly the relationship between men and elves at this point, and it shouldn't be. That's ridiculous. And it makes for very one-dimensional viewing. It's just boring because that's all you're expecting to see is the race angle. Even in Middle Earth, you're like, oh god, here we go. Now dwarves and elves you can kind of understand, except that at this point dwarves and elves don't have a reason to hate each other quite as much as they do later on. They have a competitive relationship. They are strained at times. They don't see eye to eye on everything. Certainly not. But again, the kind of tension we're seeing where everybody just trusts everybody is not really the way it's supposed to be. And they framed this story. They came out and said, well, this is a time of peace and Sauron's coming back. This isn't a time of peace. This is a time of everybody like being paranoid out of their minds. And it's not because Sauron is back. It's, they've clearly harbored this for a while now. And you're like, I don't know, okay. That's another frustration of compressing the timeline, I think, is that they're not showing people as they would normally be. Even Gil-galad, who's trying to be like, all right, we're at peace now. Is that what peace looks like? We send these warriors off to Valinor, and then what? We have Elrond go strike a deal with dwarves to make things of power to do stuff. At least Fellowship, we got to see hobbits act like hobbits. And to some extent, I guess here we saw Harfoots acting like Harfoots a little bit, but not any of these other peoples. I have no sense of what the elves are generally like, right? Other than really stuffy and PTSD riddled and manipulative. Anyway. I shouldn't have been surprised, I guess. And they're stripping down the elves on their way to Valinor, taking them off a layer at a time. I'm like, ugh, it's very cult-like and creepy. Why do you need to be in your undergarments to get back to the Undying Lands? Dang. I get that they probably don't approve of war and weapons there necessarily, but geez. Right down to the shift. I don't know. That's a nitpick, admittedly. Bear McCrory does a great McCreary, sorry. I'm butchering all of that. The score is great. Let me put it that way. It's reminiscent of Howard Shore, but it's different. It's like without being a carbon copy. It's still really good. It almost convinced me to be like awed by Khazad-dûm. But I wasn't awed by Khazad-dûm. I thought Khazad-dûm just looked good, right? Like Lord of the Rings Online. Looked good. Awesome. Khazad-dûm, woo! But for $1 billion, the elf sets sure looked pretty good. The fireworks were lovely. It reminded me of Gandalf, and that's another reason I think Meteor Man has to be Gandalf, because we saw the fireworks, and that was a direct reminder of Gandalf. Anyway, I am done for the night. That's it. It was blah, and certainly not Tolkien, but it'll give us something to laugh at, I guess, for a while. I'm not sure how much more of this I'll be able to watch, to be honest. But something compels me. I've already paid for my Prime subscription, right? Like I pay for Amazon Prime, so I'm complicit in all of this, I guess. So I don't feel bad about watching it. I've already paid for it, even though it's effectively mostly crapola. I'd be interested to see if they pull anything out of the fire, anything that's really good, or if they're just gonna continue to play it like fan fiction where nothing lines up. lots of basic characters at this point. Hopefully they'll do something with them next season. That'd be preferable. But anyway, that's it. Have a good night. I'll catch you next time.